Welcome to ZoomInData. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining Azure Logic Apps series. In this session, titled Zero Trust and Confidential Computing in Logic Apps, 2027 Features, we will cover the Zero Trust security model and how Logic Apps enforces it end-to-end. Confidential computing, what it is, how it protects data in use, and its 2027 rollout in standard model. Advanced network isolation patterns, private endpoints everywhere, no public access by default. Defender for cloud AI-specific threat detection, policy enforcement, and compliance automation. Step-by-step hardening guide plus real-world regulatory examples, 2027 preview features. This topic is essential for regulated industries, finance, healthcare, government, and any organization adopting zero trust in 2026-2027. If you find this content valuable, please subscribe to ZoomInData and enable notifications to stay updated with the full series. Let us begin. What is the Zero Trust security model, and why is it becoming mandatory for Logic Apps in 2027? Zero Trust assumes no implicit trust. Every request is authenticated, authorized, and inspected regardless of source. Logic Apps 2027 defaults to Zero Trust, no public endpoints option, private-only connectivity, identity-first access. Driven by increasing attacks on integration platforms and regulatory pressure, NIST 800-207, CISA, GDPR, DORA. What is confidential computing, and how does it apply to Logic Apps in 2027? Confidential computing encrypts data in use, memory, during execution, protects against privileged attacks, hypervisor, admin. 2027 Standard Model Preview, confidential containers for workflows, data encrypted in memory with hardware enclaves, AMD SEVSNP, Intel TDX. Use case: processing PII or financial data where even Azure admins must not see plain text. How do private endpoints enforce zero trust in Logic Apps? Private endpoint assigns private IP in your VNet service. Logic Apps standard, never exposed publicly. Inbound traffic only from allowed VNets, subnets, NSGs plus Azure Firewall. Outbound traffic can use private endpoints for all Azure services, Key Vault, storage, OpenAI. Result: no public DNS resolution, no internet exposure. What changes in 2027 make Zero Trust the default for Logic Apps? New standard tier, private only, option, disables public endpoint creation. Managed identity mandatory for all Azure service calls, no key, API auth fallback. Azure policy enforces private endpoints on all new resources. Defender for cloud blocks non-compliant public exposure. How do you enable confidential computing for a standard Logic app? Create standard Logic app, right pointing arrow, select confidential, hosting tier, 2027 preview. Choose enclave type, AMD SEVSNP or Intel TDX. Deploy workflows as usual, right pointing arrow, runtime encrypts memory automatically. Verify in Azure Monitor, confidential execution flag in metrics. What are the performance implications of confidential computing in Logic Apps? 5 to 15% overhead on CPU, memory due to encryption and attestation. Slightly higher latency on first execution, enclave initialization. Mitigate with premium vCPU, memory and caching. Redis, local state. Worth it for high sensitivity data. Optional for standard workloads. How does Microsoft Defender for Cloud protect Logic Apps in a zero-trust world? Real-time threat detection, anomalous connector calls, unusual workflow patterns, AI-specific detection, prompt injection, model abuse, data exfiltration via agents. Recommendations: enable private endpoints, managed identity, short retention, integration with Sentinel for SIEM level correlation. What Azure policy rules enforce zero trust in Logic Apps? Deny public endpoint creation on standard Logic Apps. Require managed identity for all connectors and HTTP actions. Enforce private endpoints for dependent services, storage, key vault. Audit run history retention greater than 30 days for compliance. How do you implement network isolation for Logic Apps triggers and actions? Inbound, private endpoint for HTTP request trigger, standard. Outbound, VNet integration, private endpoints for all connectors, Dataverse, OpenAI, Service Bus. NSGs plus Azure Firewall, restrict traffic to known IPs or service tags. No public DNS, use Azure Private Resolver. How do you secure managed identities at scale in Zero Trust? Use user-assigned identities for reusability across workflows. Least privilege RBAC. Custom roles with only required permissions. Conditional access policies on identity, location, device compliance. Rotate roles via Azure AD access reviews. What are the compliance benefits of 2027 Logic Apps features? Confidential computing meets FIPS 140-3 Level 3, GDPR Article 32, DORA requirements. Private-only plus managed identity simplifies HIPAA, PCI DSS, FedRAMP audits. Full audit logs in Azure Purview plus Sentinel for data lineage and access. Automated attestation reports via Azure Policy. How do you handle data sovereignty in multi-region or sovereign cloud deployments? Deploy standard Logic Apps in Azure Government, China for strict residency. Use geo-redundant storage plus cross-region replication for HA. Private endpoints per region. No cross-border traffic. Azure Policy enforces region lock. What is the impact of confidential computing on AI workflows? Protects prompts, responses, and embeddings in memory during OpenAI calls. Prevents Azure admin or hypervisor access to sensitive PII in agentic flows. Required for regulated AI use cases, healthcare diagnosis, financial advice. How do you test zero trust and confidential configurations? Use Azure Security Center penetration testing tools. Simulate attacks. Try public endpoint access. Verify denial. Attestation check. Confirm enclave integrity in Azure Monitor. Chaos test. Failover plus network segmentation. Verify continuity. What are common zero trust pitfalls in Logic Apps? Leaving public endpoints enabled. Accidental exposure. Using API keys instead of managed identity. Secret leakage risk. Missing private endpoints for dependent services. Data transits public internet. Long retention without encryption. Compliance violation. How do you migrate existing Logic Apps to Zero Trust in 2027? Enable managed identity on all workflows. Replace key-based auth. Add private endpoints for all connectors and triggers. Use Azure Migrate to assess public exposure. Policy to block new public resources. Parallel test private-only deployment. Cutover with minimal downtime. What is Defender for Cloud AI Threat Detection for Logic Apps? Detects prompt injection, data exfiltration via connectors, abnormal agent behavior. Flags suspicious OpenAI calls, high token volume, unusual models. Integrates with Sentinel for automated response. Quarantine workflow. How do you enforce zero trust governance across a large Logic Apps estate? Azure Policy Initiative. Logic Apps Zero Trust Baseline. Deny public, require identity. Azure Blueprints for compliant landing zones. Azure Purview scans for sensitive data in run history. Regular compliance reports via Microsoft Compliance Manager. What are the latest Zero Trust enhancements in Logic Apps, 2027? Confidential computing mandatory in new standard tier. Private-only deployment option enforced by default. Built-in Zero Trust policy templates. AI-specific Defender rules for agentic workflows. Why is Zero Trust, confidential computing knowledge important in interviews? Interviewers ask, how would you secure a Logic Apps workflow handling PII? Tests understanding of modern security models and compliance. Critical for regulated sectors and senior architect roles. What final recommendation would you give for Zero Trust Logic Apps? Adopt private-only plus managed identity as default in 2027. Enable confidential computing for sensitive workloads. Use Defender plus Sentinel for proactive threat hunting. Test and audit regularly. Zero Trust is a continuous posture. Thank you for watching this detailed session on Zero Trust and confidential computing in Azure Logic Apps, the 2027 security standard. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to ZoomInData. More advanced Azure Logic Apps content is coming soon. Stay connected and keep learning. See you in the next video.